All right, welcome into Mississippi State Live here on the Voice of College Football. Andrew Miller here on a Thursday night. Typically, we do our call-in show on this Thursday, but had a little bit too much news to want to get into rather than open up the lines. Plus, we haven't been getting calls lately, which is fine. It's whatever. I know we really only have a couple guys to call in, and it's been a few weeks as that is, or since that's been the case. Which it worked out because we had a lot we wanted to talk about tonight. And obviously it can be tough to dive into a bunch of topics if we got the call-in stuff going. So for tonight, just talking about the news that we have. And Jacob Wright checking in. He's ineligible. Yeah, that's going to be the topic we get into. Brandon Sneh. That news has just been made official. Bulldog in Mississippi. What's good? What's good with you? Glad to have you here. Jacob, haven't heard about it yet? Yeah, this is new. This is news today that we're about to dive into here just in a bit. So, big news to talk about. The situation with Brandon Sneh and at the Bulldogs left tackle spot, what it means for State at that position. We have a wide receiver coach hire with the addition of Philip Montgomery to the coaching staff, taking over for Bush Hamden, who obviously went off to the NFL. And also I can't forget Matt Barnes as well at safety. I don't know if I'm really going to have anything to say about that, but that move happened as well. Matt Barnes leaving it from was going to be safeties coach, kind of stay on staff, ends up going to take the special teams coordinator job at Maryland. Sounds like Zach Arnett is going to fill in there, which is fine. That's kind of all I have to say about that. So if we don't get to it later, that's whatever. And I guess I will hit briefly on the Mississippi NIL tax law just because it's relevant. I guess that was a thing when we recorded Monday night, and at the time I just was not in on it to really know the situation yet. I don't necessarily have super strong thoughts on it in the way that I think a lot of people do, but understand it's massive news impacting Mississippi State and Mississippians as a whole. So we'll try to touch on that later in the show, but appreciate everyone who has tuned in and is going to tune in. If you haven't already, please leave us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and have the notifications turned on so you do know when we do go live, when do we go live? Typically, that would be Mondays at 6 p.m. Central Time, Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central Time. Typically, the way it works, Monday night is our normal Mississippi State live show, with Thursdays being the call-in show. But as I said off the jump, not doing a call-in show tonight. We'll see. If you guys want to keep the call-in show stuff going for now, as we're kind of in the dead of the off-season, we can do that for sure. But I'm also fine just finding topics to talk about on Thursday nights as well. So y'all let me know whatever your thoughts are on that. It just worked out tonight. We had a lot to talk about, so I figured we're not going to worry with the call-in show. But also, hey, other thing to note, you can catch Mississippi State Live on your favorite audio platforms. I think we're trying to get the Apple thing figured out, but overall, I know it's on Spotify, should be on Amazon. Obviously, appreciate you guys who tune in live and appreciate those of you who come back and watch after the fact. If you weren't able to catch the show live, we love to bring you to YouTube and get those YouTube numbers up. But at the same time, understand that if you want to catch the show, sometimes it's more convenient on the go if you switch over to a podcast platform, and that's where you can listen to the show as well. So just know that you guys can check out the show from there. Bulldog Mississippi, dang, we lost left tackle to injury in March. Not injury, ineligibility. Jacob saying he likes to call in shows, going to try to call in more in the coming weeks and months. We can keep it going for a bit. It had just gotten quiet for a little, which I understand there's not a lot to talk about. And like I said, for tonight, it wasn't that I didn't want to do one. I actually, when I published the pod, I said call-in show because I thought I didn't know if we were going to really be able to talk on the Brandon Sneh thing. And the reason I said that, or the reason I say that, is because initially it was reported behind a paywall. And, I'm not to be all journalistic integrity or whatever. I'm not a member of the media, but I do want to, out of respect for the guys who actually do that work, if it's information they only have behind a paywall, I try not to dive into it here on a public forum until it just becomes fully public information. A few fans had already put it out there, but I was going to try to wait until it got reported by somebody else in MSU media before we started talking about it. So I didn't know if it was really going to be something we got into on tonight's show and it was going to be a topic for Monday. But then the guys who reported it, they went ahead and put it out there publicly. So we will discuss it here, which is, hey, that works out better because we get the instant reaction stuff. So, we'll get into that here just in a sec. But because of that, I was like, you know what? We got too much to talk about than to try to be taking calls. We just need to get into it. So that'll be the thing we hit here. Also, I had to rep Johnny Blue Sky's incredible new album. Just freaking awesome. I guess the album was out before Monday's show. It would have been. But still, I'm through a couple listens of it. It is incredible. It's very funky, very disco, very hedonistic. I love it. It's absolutely great. Okay. The big news that we've kind of been alluding to here is unfortunately reported today by Jeff Lebby to Steve Robertson and the 247 Sports Genes Page team that left tackle Brandon Sneh ineligible for the 2026 season. So, as the situation, as far as I can gather, Mississippi State signed Brandon Sneh under the understanding that he would be eligible. Obviously, that he would be eligible for the 2026 season. That he had another year of eligibility to work with. That this was going to be the final year of college football for him, but he had another year to play. And if you go off of the way that he was entered into the portal, he entered the portal as a redshirt junior or a guy who had just wrapped up his redshirt junior year at UAB on UAB's roster, listed as a redshirt junior. And the way UAB breaks it down from a bio standpoint is as a freshman in 2022 at Elizabeth City State, which is a D2 program, he redshirted. I think UAB had it that he played in 4 games, but that still applies. The NCAA redshirt rule works at D2 as well. So that he redshirted in 2022, played and started in 2023 as a redshirt freshman, transferred up to FCS Wagner College, or I don't know if it's College Wagner University, Wagner, in 2024 as a redshirt sophomore, and then played his redshirt junior year at UAB this past season, and therefore would have one more year of eligibility left to play. Apparently, that is not the case. Clearly, that is not the case. And it seems the confusion is over his first year at Elizabeth City State. That UAB had counted that as a redshirt year, or they were under the understanding that it was a redshirt year, which put Mississippi State on with the understanding of it being a redshirt year. According to, I guess, officially the NCAA, Elizabeth City State, whoever, he did not redshirt that year. I don't have a game log to tell you what happened, if he participated in more than 4 games. I don't know if for some reason he was not filed as a redshirt. I don't know the situation. What I do know is if you look him up and you go to his roster entries for both Elizabeth City State and for Wagner, they reflect that. 2023 Elizabeth City State, which was the year that UAB was saying he was a redshirt freshman, they have him listed as a sophomore. And then when he goes to Wagner in 2024 had him listed as a junior, which would again suggest that that first year at Elizabeth City State that UAB felt was a redshirt year was not actually a redshirt year. This was it for him. And Mississippi State signed him expecting he's got another year to play. That was not actually the case. Last season was his final year of eligibility. Now, I think State did look in to the potentially the D2 ruling thing that's gone wild right now to see if there was a way to get another year because of that. Unfortunately, we couldn't find a judge who could fight to hold back tears while ruling him eligible. That's what you have to do in order to make the D2 stuff work. You have to have an alum of the university get up behind the podium and have to fight back tears in order to make sure that those guys can actually be eligible for the next year. And Mississippi State just didn't have one of those guys like some institutions in the state of Mississippi do in order to make sure that a quarterback who had a cold and had a snoring problem could come back for another year of college football. State was not that lucky. So Brandon Sneh's NCAA career is done. He will participate in Mississippi State's Pro Day. And he's not going to be a Mississippi State Bulldog for the 2026 season, which is incredibly unfortunate because this is a guy that State was expecting to be its starting left tackle for the next season. A position of need. The only guy they have that's got extensive experience playing that spot. I mean, from a starting role, you kind of penciled in Brandon Sneh was going to be a guy this team relied upon heavily. we talked about the most important transfers for Mississippi State. We did an episode on that. He was number one on the list, I think. I think he was number one, but he was neither number one or number two. Brandon Sneh was a guy State was going to have to lean upon. And that's not happening now. And again, Lebby made that official with the interview that went public today with the 247 team, Gene Spage. And then now that's put out there. Lebby, the way he described it is, tough for our depth because obviously he's not just going to come out and say that was our starting left tackle, but that's the guy who's going to be State's starting left tackle. And that's an unfortunate blow. Jacob Wright, one, how was this not caught by a compliance staff? Two, it's time to join the bandwagon and file a lawsuit. Yeah. I couldn't tell you how this went over compliance. I mean, look, I can understand to a certain extent in the portal, the way UAB, because the schools are the ones who process that. UAB said he had another year to play. Clearly, and I guess to Jacob's point, when it comes to compliance, in this day and age, you cannot just assume that's the case, because the way eligibility is all over the place for players, you just need to go and say, we're going to check out. Let's do a deep dive on every single one of these guys before we bring him in. But, I mean, look, Mississippi State was not alone in recruiting him. Auburn, Oklahoma, Utah, other programs were in the mix trying to sign him. He was in the portal, and teams were recruiting him expecting that this was going to be a guy that they would be able to play for 2026, obviously. And it was not doing so off the idea that, well, we can make the D2 ruling happen. Although, I don't know, maybe some teams did catch wind of that and were hopeful of that being the case. But I think most thought he had another year to play. Clearly, that was not the case. And I guess you just can't count on the NCAA thing. Bulldog, Mississippi, Andrews, the NCAA going back and appealing a lot of these cases. Now, they're appealing Trinidad's because that's the most high profile. I don't think they're going to win it. I know I joked with that. I'm not going to dive deep into that. I've done it already here. I've given my thoughts on it. I think if Trinidad Chambliss could have helped Ferris State play football in, what is that, the 2023 season, he would have played football in 2023 regardless of his situation. But they're ruling that he was held out medically and that therefore got another year. So that's why the judge sided with him. Also, the judge is an Ole Miss guy, so of course he sided with him. State, I don't think they have much of a case here. Unless you can go back and prove he literally only played in 4 games in 2022 and therefore could be a red shirt, he doesn't have another year. But I don't think – it sounds like State's already explored whatever their options would have been. The fact they're saying he's done, he's done. It just is what it is. It's possible to get a left tackle that entered the portal but didn't sign during the cycle. Will still be available for the summer. I'm sure they're going to look to add somebody. You're not going to find a guy who's coming in to start. And I think I highlighted this. I mean, it would have been a couple months back now at this point, once guys had kind of already locked in. The pool of talent left in the portal, the guys that are left over, they are the full definition of depth pieces. And whatever the equivalent would be of a walk-on at this day and age, that's what you're looking at going forward in terms of who's left in the portal. There had been talk State was probably going to continue to add some bodies post-spring for guys who had not already enrolled elsewhere, just because, there's a couple spots they could look to add some depth, and offensive line is clearly one of those. You're not finding a guy who's going to be able to come in and compete for a starting job, especially not after participating in the spring. I mean, think about it. You're talking about guys who at this point, their talent ceiling is incredibly limited, and then you're not even giving them spring practices to go through. I understand State brought in a lot of linemen last year who were not there for the spring and they ended up playing, but this is a little bit different situation because of the players you're talking about. Not to hate on any of those guys, whoever State does add, if they do add them, wish you the absolute best, make me look like a total idiot. That's perfectly fine. Realistically, those guys are not stepping in and contributing. Kind of shady thing, but will we get a blind transfer outside of the portal? How do we get a blind transfer outside of the portal for left tackle? Yeah, I don't know what you would do. I don't think there's anything you can do. At this point, you're going to be working with what you have available on the roster. So I guess, where do you turn if you're Mississippi State now for the left tackle spot? Obviously, Miles McVay comes in as a guy from North Carolina. that played both left and right tackle, mostly right tackle, but did play some left tackle at UNC last year. Was not a starter, but did log quite a few game reps down the stretch. Late in the season, was kind of splitting time with the starters at those tackle spots and was getting involved quite a bit. I think folks around UNC thought he was performing well and could be a guy that moving forward could compete for a starting job. I had him as a guy that I had him as state starting right tackle coming into the year. You know, you're probably looking at him right now as the favorite or one of the favorites to win that starting left tackle job, which, hey, like if he can build off what he did last year, fantastic. Realistically, though, you wanted somebody that you've seen do it. And that's the biggest thing with Brandon Sneh is at least you had seen it. You knew this guy has played a ton of football. I've been a starter for 3 years at that point, at 3 different levels, but 3 years of starting as a left tackle. You know, I thought performed really well for UAB over the course of the season. I've talked about his game against Tennessee. Yeah, he got beat a couple of times, but overall competed well in that game. You could see it translating. With McVay, it's just a more limited sample set. So could he be that guy? For sure. We just haven't seen it yet. And the uncertainty is where a lot of the concern is going to come in. Other options, I mean, maybe you could kick Blake Steen over to that side. He's not been a left tackle before, primarily played right tackle at Virginia. Did have like one start at right guard, which, again, that's where I was slotting him because I thought McVay would take over as your right tackle. But you're probably talking about Blake Steen being your right tackle once again with McVay over at left. DJ Chester made starts at left tackle for LSU last year. They didn't go well. They went pretty poorly. I don't think that's what you want to do. I think you want him as a guard, maybe as a center, but primarily as a guard. He's got experience at the spot, though, which is something you are lacking. That's the big concern for State is you just don't have a lot of proven options whatsoever. Other guys on the roster, I mean, look, in terms of, Saquon Miles, top JUCO left tackle a season ago, didn't really play for you. State's had success with those guys before. I mean, most recently and notably, Martinez Rankin was the number one JUCO tackle. Didn't play as took a red shirt his first year and then stepped in and became a really good left tackle for Mississippi State and had a short stint in the NFL. I'll be honest, I haven't really broken down where Saquon matches up compared to where oh my God, I just said his name and I'm already blanking on him. But from the previous tackle that you had back, Martinez Rankin. Yeah. It's crazy that I can say his name and then immediately forget his name. I haven't checked out how they compare his prospects coming out. I know the JUCO situation is kind of different these days than it was. That would have been 2016 when he signed. But maybe there's potential there that after a year getting his feet under him at the FBS level, he's ready to go out and compete. You still have Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins, who's another guy that I think there's some optimism within the building about, another JUCO guy who got a few reps as he redshirted this past season. You might start seeing some of the young guys compete. We looked at the young class that State brought in of offensive linemen. You talk about Isaiah Dent, Jalen Matthews, Tyler Miller, Mario Nash, LJ Perdome, but he's going to be at the guard spot. Really didn't expect any of those guys to be contributors this year. Perdome is a guy who could compete for a starting job at guard, and I'm going to tell you, like right now, I will project him to start at guard because I think you're probably looking at McVay and Steen as your starting tackles, with Perdome coming in as your starting one of the guard spots. You weren't expecting that though. That was not the plan coming in. A lot of those are guys are players you expected needed a year or so to kind of get ready. So, yeah, it's a tough spot. It's not just a losing depth. You lost one of the most experienced linemen you had on the roster. And I understand he had never done it at this level. There is no guarantee Brandon Sneh was going to step in and be ready to play at an SEC level. We don't know that. And there's also no guarantee that none of the guys on the roster can't step up and be awesome. But as I mentioned earlier, the uncertainty of it all is what's frustrating and what's concerning. And I've talked about it a lot with offensive line. I say it every single time we talk this position. I value experience over everything else. State was incredibly experienced. A lot of the guys you have on the roster just aren't. What does that mean for you at that spot? Martrick's coming in. We can't catch a break. Yeah, I know. We cannot. Mississippi State, right? Mississippi State. That is very – you ain't lying. Yeah. That is Mississippi State sports in a nutshell. That's the case. Let's talk big picture here, because I know that's the conversation going around with this right now. For Jeff Lebby and the program, it's tough. It's a tough look because, look, you went into the offseason with left tackle as one of your biggest priority spots that you needed to address in the portal. We came away with what we saw last season with Timothy Lewis and Javen James, both as guys that had not shown you enough to feel confident that those were the guys you were going to lean on moving forward. And you felt, we need to upgrade at those spots. We can't say that those guys are surefire starters. We've got to get a guy in here that we feel confident he can be a starter. So you start pursuing in the portal. And, obviously Timothy, he just had an all-around rough year. He leaves. For Javen James, look, it was an interesting situation. And I'm not going to sit here and try to do revisionist history and tell you that I felt differently, because I was like a lot of you in that I was not impressed with what I saw from him. Since he has hit the portal, I've seen people whose opinions I do value, people who I know more ball than me and can watch film far better than I can, who have come away a lot more optimistic about his prospects at Alabama. Now, maybe you could say they're just hyping up Alabama. I don't think that's the case with them. I think they're guys who are going to give you their honest opinions, and they see a lot more potential in Javen James. That doesn't change the fact that at Mississippi State, he had some really rough outings. I do think there's a point to be had that we probably, as a fan base collectively, I don't want to say underrated, but overreacted maybe to some of the negative with him, just because the reality is I was not even as college football fans, as football fans, because it applies in the NFL as well. When it comes to offensive line play, we really don't pay attention unless it goes poorly, right? Our focus is on quarterback. It's on the skill positions. We're not looking at the line of scrimmage until it's very obvious somebody screwed up. So the only time you really notice offensive line is when something bad happens. And the problem for Javen James is when it went bad, buddy, it went real bad. He didn't just have like minor screw-ups. It was ugly. The Missouri game was a disaster. He was poor against Texas A&M. He had some rough moments against Tennessee. Like, he had some really rough outings. He also, and this is what's been taken away from, again, guys whose opinions I value, probably had more games where he was mostly fine, if not pretty good, than we gave him credit for. That doesn't mean State was not in the right to try to upgrade that spot. Do not misinterpret what I'm saying there. Because those ugly games can't happen. You can't have the games where it's a complete disaster out there. You've got to have somebody that you feel can be steady week in, week out, and perform well at that spot. State was well within their rights to go and try to upgrade that position. They needed to. Even if Javen James ended up being your guy, had you held on to him, you needed to bring somebody in that could compete with him and push him. Or somebody who could take over left tackle. You need a right tackle too, potentially. Kick James over to right. So you had to go out and find a guy at left tackle. And all throughout the portal cycle, you just weren't really getting in the game with those players. We're not making much of a wave. Started to hear about Brandon Sneh, and it's like, well, State kind of thinks he's not very big. Okay, well, obviously, you get Miles McVay, but it hasn't been a starter. So you don't have that provenness on the field. DJ Chester has played left tackle. You're not bringing him in to be your left tackle. At least you hope not. Then the Jordan Seaton thing became a possibility because it looked like State was in a position where it's like, all right, they got to get Brandon Sneh, and man, that's kind of their best bet. The Jordan Seaton thing becomes a possibility, and State goes all in. They put all their eggs in the basket to make that happen. You understand it, but as we talked about when you missed on Seaton, there is a level of like, okay, you had this money that you could have spent on, you were willing to spend on Seaton. That's like, where is that money going now that you couldn't make that happen? Because it was always going to be the longest of long shots. Even with the connection, even with State going all in, your chances of making it happen were just so slim that if it didn't work out, it's like, well, where do you go from here? And again, we talked about this. I know I was saying this, but like we talked about this when you didn't get Seaton. Clearly, you had money that could have gone into other positions to try to upgrade. We talked about defensive line a lot. And edge rusher a lot. You didn't really do it. We'll see if the guys who came in at those spots ended up performing really well. But you didn't get the big name proven guys with high-level production. You could have also gone out and gotten multiple other offensive linemen to compete. You didn't do that. Obviously, you do get Brandon Sneh as your consolation prize, not to take a knock at him. And like I think he's a guy who still could have, even if you had gotten Jordan Seaton, and I know it's been said it was not a either or situation that how State was approaching it. They wanted to bring both in. Perfect world. But he ends up becoming the consolation prize once you don't get Jordan Seaton. And it's like, okay, well, you've at least given yourself, like, you've done the bare minimum, but you've given yourself options. We'll see how it works. You got a guy who's played a lot at left tackle. Okay, well, the other thing that happened, though, by your pursuit of Jordan Seaton was that Jamin James got ticked and was not happy and basically demanded a level of money Mississippi State was not going to be willing to pay him in order to keep him around. He was not happy that Mississippi State was looking to recruit over him. State was well within their rights to try to do that. That they're not wrong to take that approach. But because you didn't get Seaton, you end up kind of like Sneh for James was sort of a even trade is kind of what you're looking at. Now you don't have either of them. Now you don't have either. And you're left with it was going to be a question mark regardless, because until you see any of these guys play, you don't know. But you went from thinking, okay, I think they've got at least a competent player at left tackle, to now they need somebody to step up and perform really well and do more than kind of we're expecting them to this year at one of the most important positions on the field. That is tough. That is really tough. And it's coming across more and more like State completely mismanaged this offseason. And again, I'm not trying to hate on the guys that are here and act like none of them can perform. I get it. There is potential in the room still. But I want to be able to look at the roster and say, I know they got a guy who could step in. They haven't done it. They didn't do it, and there's no changing it now. This is who you got to work with for next season. And now it becomes a big question of, all right, what does this mean for Jeff Lebby? What does it mean for the offense? Because now that's the biggest concern for the offense. It was going to be the biggest concern regardless. Are you staring the same thing in the face once again, that the offensive line just can't perform, and you got Camario running for his life back there, and your hope for success offensively is either Camario does something with his legs or you manage to be blocked just long enough for Ant or Marquise Johnson or whoever to get open downfield? If that's your offense, that's tough to sustain. And I think you're not going to be able to sustain that within the SEC. There's some levels you can get away with it. You can't get away with it in the SEC, which is why it was so imperative that you went all in to improve that room as much as possible for this year. You added a lot of young guys, and I understand the approach of wanting to get it right. I do. But the concern when we started seeing these younger takes is, all right, well, how does that help you for 2026? Is that guy going to be ready to play? Bulldog, Mississippi, how big of the freshman lineman usually takes a year or two to bulk up to the right size for SEC play. All of those guys at this point, I would say, are big enough. They've all been in a weight room long enough that they're fine. Mario Nash was the one who was pretty light. He's listed up over 300 pounds now. We'll see if he can put on a little bit more weight throughout the spring and summer. But they don't have the playing experience, though. You're in a tough spot. You're really in a tough spot. Got this comment that it's a failure of leadership for Lebby. It's year 3, and we are an SEC team. We shouldn't have to beg for scraps in regards to linemen on the other side of the ball. I agree. You can't be a mess on the lines of scrimmage and be successful. Can't happen. And Mississippi State, like right now, like the last 2 years, they've been a mess on the line of scrimmage. Both sides. Defensively, we're focused on the offense right now. D-line has not been good enough the past couple of years. I like Dalen Evans coming in. I like that Will Whitson is back available. Hopefully he stays healthy. But they also need some more guys to step up. They really need to have hit on Amari Williams and Gus Cordova and these other guys that have stepped in. We'll see. But offensive line, again, I keep going back to it. You needed proven guys there that you can feel confident. We are putting a good offensive line in front of Kamario Taylor. You don't know that you're doing that. I hope these guys are awesome that have come in. They're going to have to be. They don't really have a choice if you're going to be good enough offensively. But again, for year 3, when it's like, hey, man, like you need to show real improvement on the field. And, Lebby, the interview that he did talked about, this is the most talented roster we've had. And it is. I did an episode on that. This is the most talent they've had since Lebby's been here. It's kind of, are you back to being an SEC level roster? And what was the holdup for me? Well, are you there on the lines of scrimmage? I don't know that you're there on the lines of scrimmage again. I don't. And this could be the thing that makes or breaks Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State. It's not the decision to hold on to Coleman Huxler last year. It's not the fact that he waited to start Kamario Taylor. How they attack the portal this offseason will determine whether or not Jeff Lebby is Mississippi State's coach for the 2027 season. That's it for me. There was a couple spots they did really well out in the portal. There was a couple spots where it's like, all right, we'll see. And now offensive line was one of those, and now offensive line's gone to being, I don't know, man. I don't know. When you're losing a guy with that much experience who you had penciled in, that's our left tackle, that's tough. Again, somebody could emerge. Somebody could step in, be fantastic. I hope that's the case. Whether it be one of the newcomers, whether it be a guy already on the roster. I know State's gone into seasons in the past where you've had left, questions at different offensive line spots. We've seen players emerge. The problem is you don't have the track record to be able to say, I'm confident that's going to be the case. You haven't seen it from Lebby. You haven't seen it from Lodol. But it's concerning. That is a big knock for Mississippi State football. What's going to happen with the offensive line? It's really – that determines the upcoming season. No question about it. All right. Real quick, you want to plug here? We have the Voice of College Football store. You can check out our incredible merch, great hats, shirts, polo. Again, this one you can find in that maroon color, and they're looking to expand to get more colors on the site to get more teams represented. Sweatshirt, mugs, koozies, tumblers, a lot of great gear at the Voice of College Football on the merch store. So definitely go check that out if you want to rep the brand, the VOCFB brand that is incredible. A lot of great gear. So, yeah, wanted to plug that real quick. And I don't like how every time I go from sharing my screen to this, I have to adjust the zoom. That's very annoying to me. You don't want to see just me. More football news. Mississippi State makes the hire of wide receivers coach Philip Montgomery official. I don't know if we really talked about it on the show that Bush Hamden had left for an NFL job. I guess, what was it, the Dolphins that he went with? I don't know if we really talked about Hamden being the wide receivers coach. So obviously Hamden was one of the first offensive assistants that State brought in. It was under the position like assistant head coach for offense, which is kind of just a giant made up title to say he's here to help with offense. And at the time, I know they were still actively pursuing a wide receivers coach. There was a lot of talk that Hamden was going to be the quarterbacks coach, taking over from Matt Holsek, who was expected to be gone and done after the season. He was. But then once they hired Kevin Johns, Johns was the guy who was like more suited to work with the QB, so he takes over the QB's coach role. And you didn't really land any of the guys that you had been talking about for receivers coach. Hamden has been a receivers coach before, so they simply put him in there at that spot. But then obviously, as we've seen with a few of these college spots over the past few weeks, with the NFL jobs being filled across the country, you had some college assistants get poached for the next level, and State lost Hamden. So I had to find a wide receivers coach. And it kind of been going on now. Was this over a month? It's been the case. You're sitting around wondering who's going to hold this role for Mississippi State, and didn't really seem to have any sort of news. And people started throwing around the same names that you threw around the first time, none of which had come to fruition. But it ends up being Philip Montgomery, which is a name that does make a ton of sense. He is NOG in the Briles offense, the veer and shoot, if that's what you want to call it, super spread, whatever. This is a guy that was with Art Briles back at Stephenville High School in Texas, where this thing started, and was with Briles at Houston, at Baylor, where he was the offensive coordinator, before getting a head coaching job at Tulsa, where he spent 8 seasons there. 8 years, did have an overall losing record, had a couple tough years in there, but 4 bowl games in 8 seasons at Tulsa with a 10-win season mixed in. Also a year that they played for the conference championship. I mean, at Tulsa, that's doing pretty freaking good. Fired at Tulsa, became the offensive coordinator for 1 year under Hugh Freeze at Auburn. Spent a year with the Birmingham Stallions. I guess that's USFL. Before last year was the Virginia Tech OC and then interim head coach. And I think maybe he'd been on as an analyst somewhere. I don't remember quite for sure, but obviously State brings him in now as receivers coach. And as I mentioned, a lifer within this system, a guy who has worked alongside Lebby during their time at Baylor together, knows this offense inside and out, knows what Mississippi State's doing on that side of the ball. Has not been a receivers coach previously, mostly worked with quarterbacks and running backs when you look at the different roles that he's held along with being an offensive coordinator. But given the fact that he was an OC in this system, given the fact that he's been around since it was created, and also being a head coach in the system, you got to hire a staff that understands what you're doing on that side of the ball. I guarantee he knows all of the finer coaching points necessary to coach the wide receivers in this offense, which that was kind of one of the things that was talked about. Okay, why was State moving on from a beloved alum in Chad Bumpus? Clearly, they felt they wanted more out of the receiver position to maximize that spot, which is why I think a lot of people assumed they were going to go get a receivers coach who had been in the offense. And, had targeted guys in that type of role previously, but it just hadn't worked out. Ultimately, in the end, it does work out, and you get Philip Montgomery. And I think it's a very good hire. And look, I thought Hamden was a good hire as well. And one of the things I talked about with Hamden, and this was before we knew who was going to be a receivers coach, is I thought there was value in adding a guy to the room who brought such a different perspective and background than everybody else she had on staff, because Hamden was a pro-style guy. Had been from his time with Chris Peterson at Washington and Boise, at Florida, Missouri, more pro-style, NFL for that matter, been more of a pro-style coach. And while State was not going to be changing the offense, State was not going to be changing philosophy, any of that kind of stuff, there can be value to having a guy on your staff who has come from a different background that you can turn to and say, like, okay, hey, like, what are your ideas on this? Or a guy who can look at your personnel and say, we did that and that worked with them. We faced that type of defense. We did this and it was very effective. Just to be able to present some new ideas, some different perspectives, some different philosophies that you can then try to implement into what you do and make it work together. Not to come in and completely shift things, but just to give you some different ideas. There can be value in having those different backgrounds in a coaching staff. Now, I wasn't as thrilled with him as receivers coach, not because he couldn't do the job. He's done it before and he's done fine, but doesn't have like a super extensive track record as a high-level recruiter. his development. I think he had some good receivers at Washington, so that's good for him. But also, not in this offense. So where it could be beneficial to have the different perspective just as a voice in the room as like an analyst or associate head coach for offense, whatever the BS position title they gave him was. When it comes to the position coaches and you're telling the receivers what to do and you're running a kind of a niche system like Mississippi State is, I would like to have a coach who really knows that system. So that's where it could have been iffy. And that's part of why I think Montgomery's a really good move is you're bringing in a guy who clearly is going to be able to get to those finer coaching points. Even though he's not been a receivers coach before, that's not a concern. I also think the value for sure, which by the way, when it comes to recruiting, because Montgomery doesn't have like a long track record as a receiver recruiter either. I'm sure he's been involved in plenty of the guys that Baylor brought in over the years when they had those great wideouts. I can't imagine he didn't play any role in that. But as we kind of talked about Bumpus, when you lost Bumpus, you're not that worried about State being able to attract receiver talent. Also, you have Coach Lindsey on staff who should be able to handle a lot of that with those ties within the state of Mississippi. State's going to get receivers. Like they wanted to make sure they had a guy who could step in to coach them up well. I think you feel really good about Philip Montgomery being the guy to do that. The other part to it, though, that I think a lot of people are really excited about is this is a guy who's been a head coach. And what was the biggest thing people were concerned about with Lebby coming out of this season? It was, game management. And is he really the guy to be leading a program, the guy to be a head coach? Because you saw so many of those issues arise. I think in terms of a day-to-day operation of the football program, handling of the transfer portal notwithstanding, I think Lebby's done a lot of really good things that give you confidence he kind of knows what he's doing. On game days, it's been a bit more frustrating. And then in terms of getting the team up ready to play every single week, it's been a bit more frustrating. Bringing a guy on staff who's, one, very comfortable with Lebby, that they've worked together, they got a lot of experience together, but has done the job. And like I said, at Tulsa, you go to 4 bowl games in 8 years, you have a 10-win season, conference championship game appearance. It's doing pretty good. Yes, he was the coach when the fight happened in the Armed Forces Bowl between Mississippi State and Tulsa. But, the guy had a good run as a head coach, all things considered. There's value in having a guy like that in the room that Lebby can turn to and get some ideas from and can delegate to, honestly. And someone who can tell Lebby, like, hey, this is the way you need to do things a little bit differently. Or there's some advice to give you. I think there's a lot of value that. Can he help with some of the game day management? There's all of that. Also, again, he's been an OC, and we've discussed this a lot. Is Lebby going to give up play calling? No. Do I think he should give up play calling? Also, no. But having a guy on staff, it's one thing to have guys on staff that you trust as good coaches, that I can give them some responsibilities and kind of give him his pseudo-OC role and him handle it well. Having a guy who's literally been an OC in this offense for several years, called plays in this offense, done so at a very high level while working alongside Lebby is another story. Montgomery has done that. So I think he can do a lot for you when it comes to your install, from your game planning and situational calls, all that kind of stuff. That's a good voice to have in the room. Now, obviously, you're clearly going all in on, hey, this is our philosophy, this is our identity. That's very different than with Hamden, where it's different perspectives. I'm not trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth and tell you that one is better than the other, or just say that this is better now because this is who Mississippi State's hired. I think there's value in both, and there's potential negatives in both. What would be the negative here to going all in on, we're bringing another guy in who just knows this system more than anything else? Well, if everything goes wrong, can you adjust, right? Or are you locked in on this kind of all we know how to do? That would be the holdup there. But I also think there's a point in saying, like, this is our identity as a team. This is what we know. This is what we believe in. We need to commit to it. And you're doing that by bringing in Montgomery. So I think it's a very good move. I think you look at the offensive coaching staff, this was true with Hamden as well, but you have 4 guys on staff who have been good play callers, or been good offensive coordinators, at least, in their career, between Lebby, Montgomery, Kevin Johns, and Anthony Tucker was OC at Utah State. I don't know if he was play caller or not, but I know he was offensive coordinator and took that offense to Utah State. But now, that was true with Hamden as well, because he had been an OC. By bringing in Montgomery, you've got 3 of those guys have done it within this offense. When you talk about Lebby, Montgomery, Anthony Tucker, and Kevin Johns has been around the offense as well. That's a good spot to be. You've got a lot of guys in that offensive coaching staff who really understand this system at a high level. And I think that gives you a lot of value. Now, one of the most important spots, offensive line, we'll see what that is going to turn out being, as we've talked a lot about today. But feel good about this addition with Montgomery on staff. I think it's a nice pickup and a really positive move for Mississippi State. All right. Last thing we'll talk about here. Obviously, the state of Mississippi made it, I guess, official that going forward, college athletes will not pay state income tax on their NIL earnings. This is a move that Mississippi is doing, kind of trying to keep pace with some of the other teams within the SEC. Arkansas implemented a similar or the same measure last year with no NIL, or sorry, no state income tax on NIL earnings. You have a couple states within the SEC, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, that do not have state income tax as it is. So that's obviously another move to try to keep pace with those states within the conference as well. Obviously, it's been a big talk within the state of Mississippi about just as a whole eliminating state income tax. That was something they look to do. I don't know the time frame on that. I think someone said it could be within the next decade, but still quite some time. The state is trending in that direction, but they've went ahead and made it official when it comes to NIL earnings. Again, college athletes do not have to pay income tax, at least not to the state of Mississippi. Been a lot of opinions, been a lot of thoughts about this. And as I said off the jump, I don't necessarily have a super strong take one way or another. You know, I'm a Mississippi resident. I'm a Mississippi taxpayer. Obviously, I'm not getting that kind of a tax break. But I'm also just not one to have my gears grind, I guess, over something like that. I allow my gears to be grind over much more trivial things, which, you know, is my lack of emotional maturity. But I kind of saw the news and was just sort of okay, you know, to it. But if you're someone who's very upset right now, I fully understand it. Believe me, I get it. That's because it does feel like a slap in the face to a lot of your hardworking residents in the state, people who are struggling to get by, people who are not getting anything gifted to them in life in the way that a lot of these college athletes are. I thought Michael Borky had a pretty good rant on this for Sports Talk and like how much these athletes get handed to them, and you're giving them this as well. It again, if you're frustrated, you're upset about this, I don't blame you in the slightest. It's not a great look. With that, why is Mississippi doing it? Like I said, you have other states that are already not taxing NIL earnings. Like I said, Arkansas implemented it specifically, and then you have the other states that just don't have a state income tax to begin with. You're trying to keep pace. You're trying to keep pace with those teams, those SEC states or college football states, college sports states. You're trying to get an edge over the likes of Alabama, Louisiana. And there was an interesting point I saw raised on this. It's obvious because it comes down to getting players, right? We know this. Why are you doing this? You're trying to attract players. You're trying to tell players, come play here at these programs. You get to make more of what you earn in NIL stays in your pocket because you're coming to play at either Mississippi State or Ole Miss or Southern or whoever for that matter. Your NIL earnings will not be taxed if you come play here. That's what you're selling to try to get better players here. I hadn't even thought about the high school aspect of this. We had on SEC Live, it's the host of Locked on the Portal came on. Brian Smith. I knew it was Brian Smith. I can't believe I blanked on that. Brian Smith, who hosts Locked on the Portal, came on the show last night as we recorded. And what he talked about was specifically high school players in the state of Mississippi, a thing that we've known is the case for a long time. Those guys bail. Obviously, there's a handful of guys each year who do stick around and sign. A lot of them sign in-state, but a lot of the top players in Mississippi go to other schools. Specifically, I mean, Alabama, LSU poach those guys left and right. Georgia, another state that you're trying to get a little bit of a leg up on. And you are trying to give those players reason to stay home. It's not all about just going out and getting guys in the portal. It's the guys coming out of high school as well, where this money, it's the first time that you're getting something offered to you. Hey, stay home. We're not going to tax you on your NIL. You get to keep that in your pocket. It's definitely an effort to keep a lot of the best players in the state in Mississippi. Now, look, and you understand why the state would go for this, right? The big picture idea is better players at State and Ole Miss means better seasons for State and Ole Miss, which means more fans going to games, more fans going to those towns. The local economy is getting driven up. More exposure for those schools, which means more enrollment. The universities get better. You increase the state economy. You keep people in the state of Mississippi to continue to grow the state. There are positive impacts that come with college athletics. The idea of college sports being the pathway to success for a university and then subsequently, I guess, your state's economy or at least your city's economy is very real. We see it. Alabama is a fantastic example of this. Tuscaloosa today is not what Tuscaloosa was pre-Nick Saban. University of Alabama today is not what University of Alabama was pre-Nick Saban. If you get an impact like that, it changes a lot. So clearly the state lawmakers are saying, whatever opinions anyone's going to have on this, we don't care. This is a chance for us to better our athletic departments, which betters our universities, which betters college towns, blah, 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 blah. Will it actually do that? I don't know. Another interesting point raised, Matt Brown, who does the Extra Points newsletter, which had a pretty cool thing out today. I'm not a subscriber, but it looked like they're kind of breaking down what goes into building a college basketball schedule, because that's a big debate right now with Miami, Ohio, and their poor strength of schedule versus should they be a tournament team? That debate. But Matt Brown put this out when the news of this broke, critically and fairly so. I have no issue with him being critical of it. That this is a move that is not going to, basically saying it's not going to be as effective as they're thinking, and all you've really accomplished is pissing off the people within your state. And it's like, okay, well, what does he mean by that? State of Mississippi state tax, income tax is 4% set, like 4% across the board, as long as you earn $10,000. So whether you barely meet that threshold of being a $10,000 a year earner or you're a billionaire, you pay 4% on your state income tax. Well, the point Matt Brown had is for the bulk of college athletes, that 4% equates to probably around $30,000, which is a lot of money to a lot of us. That's not a lot of money to a college athletic department. And his point was, you can't tell me there's not big-time SEC or Big Ten schools in other states that do have to pay the income tax that won't just hand over an extra $30,000 to get those guys to come. Now, look, once you start talking about the players that are earning $4 or $5 million, yeah, that's a little bit of a bigger hit, but that's such a small percentage of players. And again, I think there's schools out there that would find a way to make up for it. So are you actually going to keep players home or attract more talent over this? I don't know. I kind of get Matt's point. There's probably a lot of programs out there that are just going to say, yeah, we're just going to pay you whatever it would take, whatever you would have made there post-tax. We're just going to give you that plus more and then come to our program. And if that's really how this works out, and this doesn't turn to State and Ole Miss signing a bunch of incredible players year in, year out, then truly all you've done is made your voters very upset and your residents very upset. And like I said, I'm not someone who is personally going to be all that offended one way or another. It kind of is what it is in my mind. But there's a lot of people rightfully ticked off right now, and I fully understand it. So it's an interesting move. Perfect world, Mississippi State starts signing better players, which I think you got to win before that happens. But that's going to be something to watch in the coming years. How does that really change things, if at all? But interesting move nonetheless from the state of Mississippi. Controversial move, but interesting. All right, that'll do it for me this evening. I really appreciate those of you who participated in the chat, tuning in. Love having the back and forth, love the conversation. Good show tonight. One of the more active shows we've had in quite some time. I like that. Really enjoy it. So, yeah, thanks again to all of you. If you haven't already, please leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. Have the notifications turned on so you do know when we do go live. And as always, swing your sword.
Hey, y'all. This is Grant Sashery of LSU at the Voice of College Football Network. I'm here today to announce that the Voice of College Football Network now has its official website. It's been uploaded so you can look at all the latest news and content from the Voice of College Football Network. You can also look at different forums, channels, shows, and it has to show all the show schedules right here and the host. Make sure to check out the Voice of College Football's new website at vocfb.com. Once again, vocfb.com.